So this is my iPhone 13 that I got a little over a year ago. The way I buy my phones is probably a bit different than most people. I'd imagine most people buy new phones, then use them for a year or two, maybe three or four depending on the person, and then they buy their next one, perhaps sell the old one. But I honestly can't remember the last time I bought a phone new. Probably never. In fact, my only new iPhone was bought for me by my parents while I was still in school, and it was this iPhone 3GS. And I don't mean just this model, I mean this actual phone was my high school phone and my first iPhone. I was never one of those kids who'd ask for crap from their parents, but they knew I wanted it because I would tell them how one of the kids from the school had it, and everybody was asking to borrow it on recess so they could play Zombieville on it. So when it was time to renew our contract with our service provider, they got it for me because they were basically giving it away with a new contract. And man, did I love this thing. I used it for probably like 7, 8 years until it started acting up. The audio jack started cutting out, and I do believe this might have been the first piece of actual tech I repaired. I got a replacement audio port from eBay, and I actually fixed the jack, but ended up messing up the buttons on it a little bit. Anyway, that was my last iPhone for a while, because when I started college, I was a total hipster, and I couldn't be seen with an iPhone or any other smartphone. I actually switched to using like a brick old phone without a touchscreen. It was only when I went to study abroad, when my family talked me into getting like a smartphone because they wouldn't let me leave the state with an old Nokia. I ended up getting an LG of some sort. It was only some years after, when my other phone died and I had to get a new one, I had the idea of trying to go back to an iPhone. I ended up getting an iPhone 8, mainly because I found a great deal, of course, something like $100, which was awesome at the time. I ended up really liking it, so when my battery started not really holding a charge anymore, I've started to look around for a replacement, and I got myself an iPhone 11, again for a great price, around $200 if memory serves. I've sold the previous one for like the same amount I've bought it, and I've used the iPhone 11 again for around a year. After the battery dropped to like 77%, I've sold it for like $250 and bought an iPhone 13 for like $350, which is not a terrible price even still today. And I gotta say, I still think this is a great phone, even in 2024. I actually like the smaller form factor, even though I do prefer the larger screen of the 15 Pro Max. It's the 256GB blue model, the camera is great, it does 4K, and it still looks pretty decent in my view. If you watched my videos, they have all been shot on this thing, except for a couple of last ones, since those have been shot on the 15 Pro Max. The only reason I've been looking into getting a new phone is, again, given how extensively I use my phones, I've been starting to drain the battery more and more, and of course I've started this YouTube thing and was thinking about getting something with a better camera. I usually get a phone that's 2 generations newer than my current phone, but that's in no way my most important condition when getting a new phone. For me, most important condition is the price. I'll only buy it if it's a good deal. So I was browsing the iPhone 15 phones category, not the 16 because I don't think you can get a good deal there, but these 1 or 2 year old generations are a good place to start because with the introduction of the iPhone 16, people are reselling their old phones. I also wanted to perhaps get the Pro Max one just for the extra camera features and because I've never had one. So initially I wasn't really finding anything I'd call a good deal, $800, $1,000, all while filtering through the fake ads and scams. But then I noticed this ad located not far from me. It was listed for $550 at first, but after a couple of days it dropped to $500. The only issue with it seemed to be the cracked back glass. I don't really like buying broken phones because it's just a hassle and an additional expense to repair them, especially these iPhones. But one reason I've considered buying this one is because on these models, the back glass is actually reasonably straightforward to replace. You don't have to buy the new housing and move all the components to it like on the older ones, nor use like a laser machine or whatever. Also, the batteries seem to be in a good condition with 90% of health. It was also the 256GB model, which I already had, and honestly, it's plenty. It's always nice to have extra storage, but I don't really keep my videos on the phone. I usually move them right away and archive them. So I made a poll on my YouTube page asking whether I should buy it, and the majority said yes, and I love listening to my fans. I gave the guy a call and inquired about the phone. He made it clear that the price was not negotiable, so I didn't push it and I went to pick it up. Upon arriving, he said there were already a bunch of people asking about it. So I picked the phone up, made sure everything worked, and brought it home. Apart from the back glass, everything seemed to be top-notch. It did have this annoying piece of metal glued to the back, but the glass was really in a bad condition, and it was cracked exactly where the cameras are, which made me worried about dust getting in there and screwing up the cameras. If the crack wasn't as bad, I would have probably just put a case over it. And I've actually called up a couple of places to see how much it would cost to replace the back glass in their shop, and they've quoted me between $250 and $300. So this made my decision. I was going to try fixing it up myself. I've ordered a couple of parts on AliExpress, and after waiting for around 2 weeks, they showed up. The back glass replacement as well as the seals. I've also gotten a new case for it, and I don't really know how people use these things without cases. I've tried for the past couple of weeks, and I felt like handling a crystal ball ready to slip from my fingers. I've also gotten a screen protector, and all in all I've spent around $50 on these parts. So I prepared some things I thought I'd need to do this repair. Apart from the spare parts, I also got some alcohol, an X-Acto knife with some extra tips, precision screwdrivers, and my hot air station. I wanted to use that instead of the hot air gun to soften the adhesive holding the back glass in place. Oh, and the most important component, this special substance that makes your hands not shake when you're doing a nerve-wracking repair. Comes in very handy. Okay. So I've proceeded with the repair. The first thing I had to do was removing the little pentalobe screws from the bottom, and I've started heating the adhesive around the perimeter. Afterwards, I got my blade in there and pried it up with no issue. Soon I remembered to better put on some gloves to avoid getting cut by the knife or the glass. This part of the repair was actually fairly simple. The glass came off easier than I'd imagined, and the fact that it was broken actually made it easier to remove. Also, please don't think this is some sort of a tutorial, because I'm in no way an expert. I'm not giving anybody any advice on how to do this, I'm just showing how I did it, and it most likely isn't a proper way of doing it, so just bear that in mind. I'm an idiot filming myself doing a half-assed DIY repair. When I got to the cameras, I got really nervous. I was super worried about messing up the cameras, accidentally bumping them with my knife, dropping a piece of glass in it, or something. So my hands really did start to shake and sweat at this point, and holding that knife I really felt like a surgeon. After lifting the camera bump, I've actually put in a bit of plastic wrap over the cameras, and I fixed them in place with some tape. After removing all the glass, it was time to try to get rid of all that adhesive. And this was by far the hardest thing here, because trying to scrape off the glue, it would just come off in small chunks, and there were bits of glass stuck to it. I've also used some alcohol and some Q-tips to try and soften the adhesive. It worked reasonably well, but it took a lot of time and effort. In the end, I did manage to remove all of the glass and the glue, as best as I could tell. Also, the annoying thing about this repair was how I kept turning on the phone, just because it was so easy to do by accident. Before getting ahead of myself, I wanted to see whether the flash and the charging coil on the replacement part actually worked. So I turned the phone off again and connected the new part. The flash worked, and after testing the wireless charging and confirm it also worked, I've proceeded to continue with the repair. I've spent some time making sure the surface was clean, and then I moved on to installing the seal. I bought 5 of them because I was certain that I'd mess up a couple of them in the process, because this was my first time doing something like this, and yeah, I was right. I screwed up 2 seals before figuring out how it should be done, and I've installed it in the frame. It seemed to fit fine, and I've removed the protective film. After reconnecting the back glass, I've screwed in the little bracket, which, I mean, look how tiny these screws are. So it was time to close this thing back up, and after making sure I've lined everything up, I've closed it up, and it seemed to fit fine. Everything was looking very good until... yeah, I cracked it. I must have used too much force when applying pressure to this thing. Before you freak out and start calling me names, please note that the crack is barely noticeable. I mean, I can't even feel it with my fingers. And even though it was disappointing to screw this up at the last minute, in my defense, it could have gone so much worse. I could have broken the camera, the cable, the connector, pierced the battery, damaged the SMD components to the point where the phone wouldn't work, so a crack in the back glass really isn't too bad. and I do think it's far, far better than it was before. At least there's no dust coming in and ruining the cameras. Also, the very next thing I wanted to do was to install the screen protector and the new case. The screen protector I went with came with a whole bunch of things to make it easier to install, and it did seem to work quite good, but I was still left with a small air bubble near the edge, but it disappeared after minutes of use. And after popping this thing in the protective case, it really does look pretty nice. All in all, I'm very happy, and even though this repair wasn't perfect, it was my first time doing it, and I've learned a lot. I've also saved a lot of money by not giving it to the shop to repair, and I don't really mind the crack. I mean, I'm never going to notice it underneath the case, and it doesn't compromise the dust water resistance or the functionality in any real way, well, other than dropping it in water, but I've never done that, and I don't think the crack is where the water is going to come in first. And I know people are going to ask me, no, unfortunately, I won't be giving away my old phone, and that's because I'll be giving it to my wife. She has a piece of shit old phone with a terrible camera, and she really deserves something better. So what do I think about this phone? Honestly, I really feel like this is a decent upgrade, and there are some things I really enjoy, so I'll just name a couple that come to mind. First off, the camera is pretty good, and while it probably isn't a huge upgrade from the 13 model, it still does feel like a higher quality, sharper camera. Also, the zoom on it and the range are absolutely insane. Always on display, I wasn't sure how I'd feel about this one, but it has grown on me really much, honestly, in these past 2 weeks. I like it. The action button, whatever. I don't mind it, but I don't really use it either. Titanium frame, yeah, I couldn't care less, honestly. The biggest win, in my opinion, is the USB-C, and not just the form factor, but all the things that come with it for this particular model. Fast charging and fast transfers. It's just so awesome to be able to use my big MacBook power supplies with this and have it charge in a matter of minutes. I'm not going to do a full review or anything, but I just wanted to mention a couple of features I like over my old model. And anyway, for $500 plus $150 for the parts, I gotta say I'm pretty happy with this purchase. It made my videos look even better in my opinion, and it's overall a neat little phone. I probably wouldn't pay $1,000+ for it, but hey, that's just me. Anyway, if you do find one of these with a broken back glass, I think it is something you can do yourself. And even if you had to buy 2 back glass replacements and you ended up breaking one, like me, it's still way cheaper probably than replacing these in the shop. And they'll hopefully do a much better job than me. But hey, you're probably less of a dingus than me also. Thank you so much for watching, and if you do like watching me do half-assed repairs, there are plenty here on this channel. I also do tech overviews and retrospectives and all sorts of things, so if you're interested in that, you might want to consider subscribing. I do these videos 2 times a week, and you can also follow me on Patreon, where you'll get early access to my videos, and you can also chat with me. You can join for as little as $1 a month, or more if you'd like. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.